started with a so they'll be able to join right in. So welcome to everyone. My name is Christy Scheffler, and I'm part of the team joining you here from the National ECE Workforce Center. We are very excited to join you today for this coffee chat. And we are continuing with our series that's focused on our ECE systems change framework. And today we're going to be discussing the second topic, the brief called Multi-Sector and Multi-Partner Collaboration in Systems Change for the ECE Workforce. And this is actually, I won't say hot off the press, but maybe hot on the press. It's set to be released today. All right, so as we get started, we first want to note that our center is supported by a grant from the Administration for Children and Families. However, while ACF is the source of our center's funding, we don't necessarily reflect the views or opinions of ACF, which includes the Office of Early Childhood Development, the Office of Head Start, the Office of Child Care, and the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. For those of you who are new to meeting with us, the National ECE Workforce Center is a joint research and technical assistance center, and we support state and territory and tribe and community and program leaders on improving the systems that support the ECE workforce. So we are specifically currently focused on working towards competitive compensation and clear and accessible pathways for the existing workforce. And to do that, we provide services across a continuum of universal and targeted and intensive supports. And one key feature is that all of our supports are grounded in our systems change framework. Each service we offer includes a unique blend of research and TA that incorporates our learnings around that framework. And the framework is actually the basis of the brief series that we are currently meeting with you about. And for those who are new to coffee chats are just informal opportunities for systems leaders to come together to kind of actively engage in discussing different topics. A variety of topics related to strengthening those systems that do support the ECE workforce. So each coffee chat focuses on a specific product that is being released from the Workforce Center. And the authors of the products join us for the discussions, walk us through a brief recap of the topic, and then we spend the majority of our time in smaller groups where we can kind of share with and learn from colleagues. And housekeeping items, if it would be helpful to you, you can turn on the closed caption. Just click the More on your Zoom taskbar, and you can select the language that you would like for captions. To note, since coffee chats are set up as a conversation rather than a webinar, as we move forward, and especially in our smaller discussions, we do appreciate cameras being on if you're comfortable and if your technology is working today. During this first part where we're recapping the brief and the topic, we ask that microphones stay muted, but then when we shift to the smaller conversations, we'd love to hear from you directly. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the brief we are discussing today. Now, I'm actually going to keep going for a few minutes. So this brief is titled Multi-Sector and Multi-Partner Collaboration in Systems Change for the ECE Workforce. And as I mentioned, this is the second coffee chat in our series that is focused on the drivers of our systems change framework. And we're going to be taking a closer look at the primary driver, multi-sector and multi-partner collaboration. And the idea of the briefs and these coffee chats are that we can focus on getting into some more practical guidance and strategies related to strengthening the driver and leveraging it to further systems change. As a brief recap, this graphic depicts our systems change framework. And the framework is a theory of change that highlights key components of meaningful and sustainable systems change. The framework is grounded in evidence from ECE as well as other fields. So on the left, that red box, the aims are, they show what we are trying to achieve. Aims are the ultimate desired outcome, what we're working toward. In the middle, the primary drivers are the things that need to change or that need to be put in place to achieve the aims. The primary drivers reflect the different parts of the system. In our framework, there are 9 primary drivers that are nested in these 3 driver types: practice, infrastructure, and principles drivers. And then on the right, the secondary drivers are strategies, the how to strengthen the primary drivers to achieve the aims. So in this brief, and in today's coffee chat, we're focused on multi-sector and multi-partner collaboration. So in the center's framework, multi-sector and multi-partner collaboration is one of our 4 infrastructure drivers. The infrastructure drivers are grouped together because they really form the foundational elements that make systems change possible. These are the aspects that are needed to create the conditions for change. And if you are interested and would like to take a closer look at the systems change framework as a whole, we do have our introduction to the systems change framework available on the website. And Brianna or someone might be able to pop that into the chat. So now we're going to get into the content of this primary driver. So we know the ECE workforce is shaped by many different interdependent systems and elements. And actually, each of the aims that we call out in our framework is impacted by multiple systems. That's part of what makes these challenges so complex to address. So, for example, thinking of competitive and fair compensation, we know compensation depends on labor market and both private and government funding streams and employer practices. And looking at clear and accessible career pathways rely on alignment between workforce standards and higher education and licensing systems, professional development systems. And because these elements are so connected, we see that no single entity, no single agency has either the authority or the capacity to address them alone. Progress requires alignment across sectors. That's why multi-sector and multi-partner collaboration is one of those key infrastructure drivers in the framework. Collaboration across systems is really the only way to create that meaningful, a durable change. Across our aims, our framework identified 3 secondary drivers for the multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration driver. These are the practices and the strategies to establish and sustain effective collaboration for systems change. Importantly noting that it's collaboration for and with the ECE workforce. So the goal for today is that we're going to expand on these, offer some details and examples of how multi-sector and multi-partner collaboration can be developed and strengthened. And we'll look through these one at a time. So the first strategy, the first secondary driver, is that cross-sector coalitions convene to jointly plan, make decisions, implement, and evaluate initiatives in support of the aim. So to start, we recognize that partnerships work best when they leverage existing structures. Like many states have early childhood advisory councils in place. And by acknowledging and relying on existing structures, it helps reduce duplication and helps to strengthen alignment. It's important to note that as part of such coalitions, though, having intentional feedback loops between the state leaders and the local leaders or the coalition members is really critical. So, for example, having state leaders attending local network meetings or vice versa, together they're able to use those spaces to jointly identify shared priorities, to discuss resources across levels of the system, and discuss solutions that work for both state and local levels. Looking at an example, in Louisiana, this approach helped support their early childhood ancillary certificate. Once the certificate was mandated, the Department of Ed partnered with CCR&Rs, institutions of higher ed, school districts, and nonprofit organizations to coordinate statewide supports. And since that time, quarterly calls sustain the collaboration and allow for that flow of information to go both ways, and promoting that continuous improvement. The second practice, or the second secondary driver, is diverse cross-sector coalitions work together to establish and operate with shared understanding, goals, and vision to guide their efforts. It's highlighting or calling out that clear structures for collaboration and communication are critical. This includes things like holding regular meetings and maintaining open and shared communication channels, and having clear processes for what shared decision making looks like. This practice also includes recognizing and supporting participation from all parts of the workforce. For instance, that might mean holding meetings virtually or in the evenings to accommodate educator schedules. Really making sure to engage in practices to ensure representation across different roles and settings. And thinking about family childcare and center-based care and school districts, and looking across roles with program administrators and infant toddler educators, as well as preschool and pre-K educators, and thinking of both profit and nonprofit settings. So as one strategy, systems can establish change teams to guide this work. A change team is a small cross-sector group that leads focused initiatives. For example, working to expand CDA or articulation pathways. The change team includes the multiple perspectives and experiences and roles, notably, that are impacted by that initiative. So if we think about that example of a change team focused on expanding CDA or articulation pathways, the change team might include perspectives from not only across state agencies, but educators across settings, PD organizations, institutions of higher ed, and high school pathways. So change teams can work together to refine strategies, to connect with stakeholders, and then share lessons and recommendations back with the larger coalition. Looking at an example, in Wisconsin, the Innovative Communities Initiative brings together diverse local teams to identify challenges that impact families' access to childcare. And they also work together to co-design local solutions. Their efforts demonstrate how shared structures that are targeting a specific goal can lead to both responsive and sustainable solutions. And then the third practice is regular meetings and financial incentives promote active engagement and collaboration among cross-sector partners for initiatives in support of the aim. So this practice highlights the need for dedicated resources to sustain engagement. We know collaboration takes time and capacity, both of which require investment. So to support participation from early educators and parents and other stakeholders who are not already funded to do this work, financial supports like stipends and logistical supports like substitute coverage or having flexible meeting options, those types of supports allow them to fully participate. And similarly, providing targeted funding opportunities for institutes of higher ed and PD partners can serve to promote alignment of their programming with the workforce system needs. So as an example, in New Jersey, the state invested in higher education to expand faculty capacity to participate in different workforce initiatives. And that strategy allowed educators and faculty to co-create new credentialing programs, a program that is aligned with workforce needs. So if we step back and look at an overall example, New Mexico's work to develop a unified wage scale offers a strong example of multi-sector and multi-partner collaboration in action. So early in the process of establishing a unified wage scale, so a scale for early care and education and home visiting and early intervention, systems leaders recognized that not all voices that were impacted by this work were part of the conversation. So leaders worked with the state's Early Childhood Advisory Council to establish a task force to inform the design of a new wage scale. And the 24-member task force included representation of center-based and family-based childcare, infant toddler programs and pre-K, Head Start, home visiting, advocacy groups, institutes of higher ed, and workforce support partners. And they committed to meeting twice a month for 6 months, with all meetings being held virtually, which enabled participation across the state. And the state provided stipends for those whose time wasn't already being compensated, like direct service providers. And this process overall led to meaningful engagement and shared leadership. And it also served to strengthen trust across sectors and really laid the groundwork for that compensation reform in New Mexico. So to establish and strengthen multi-sector collaboration, systems leaders can take action. Mapping existing partnerships that support the ECE system. So for example, taking a look and identifying which coalitions or councils already exist, and identifying which perspectives might be missing from the table. Second, forming targeted work groups or change teams for focused action. So for example, identifying which change teams might be needed to advance initiatives. What are those goals? And who should be included to reflect that range of perspectives and expertise? As part of the change team, what processes will help them shift from discussing into planning and action? And then how are they going to stay connected to the broader coalition and stakeholders alike? And then third, providing the resources that make collaboration possible. So what financial and logistical supports will allow and promote full participation and meaningful engagement across partners? And then how can IHEs at higher ed and PD partners also be supported to engage with workforce initiatives? So as we wrap up our recap, this brief is designed to highlight that multi-sector and multi-partner collaboration, it's not just a helpful strategy, it's really a necessary condition for sustainable systems change. And we see that when states and communities do align across sectors, they build that foundation for stronger, more equitable ECE workforce system. Okay, so that brings us to the main part of our time together, where we're going to have a conversation with everyone here. So we're going to spend the next 45 to 50 minutes having a broader discussion with everyone, and then kind of shift back together and wrap things up. So I'm going to stop talking for a little bit and turn it over to a colleague to facilitate. And it looks like, who is that going to be? Is that Sandra or Kathy?
I think we're both here and available, okay. So I'm happy to jump in. Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Ranham, and I am Deputy TA Director, one of our Deputy TA Directors with the National ECE Workforce Center. So thank you so much, Christy, for providing that overview of the forthcoming brief and those great examples. And so now we'd love to just dive into a conversation with those of you on the call to think about what does this look like in your work, in your community, in your program, in your state. And So I'll pose the first question. We're going to offer multiple modalities. And so there will be a whiteboard link put into the chat um, that you can add your contributions and your thoughts in the whiteboard, but we'd also love to have a dialogue with each other. And so I'm going to pose this first question, which we'll also put into chat. And you can feel free to come off of mute. I think we're a small enough group that we can just have a dialogue. And if you all get really going and actively engaged, I'll might start asking folks to raise hands to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to share. But um, as you see, Christy has asked if you can please introduce yourself in chat, but you can also, when you first speak, please feel free to just briefly say your name and give us your role so we kind of know where you sit in your system. But the first question is, how is your context currently engaging partners across sectors? Who is currently at the table and who is missing? And just love to hear about how you're experiencing um, the configuration of these cross multi-partner, multi-sector collaborations in your work. And so thank you, Christy, for putting the question in chat. And then there's a link to the whiteboard, but who's willing to unmute and talk about who you see sitting at these tables and who do you not see in the work that you're doing? Hello, Leslie, welcome. Thank you for introducing yourself. Andrea.
Hello,
Hello.
I am Jasenia Rosario Adan, Director of Quality Improvement for Quality Stars New York. At the table, we have different stakeholders in New York State just supporting the workforce, but some of the tables that I am currently sitting at includes our local CCRNRs, collaborating with them, while at the same time also collaborating with the Office of Children and Families regional managers, those that are in charge of kind of ensuring mandatory compliance with the licensing regulations. We're also at the table with the trainers that we have listed on our state registry, Aspire, and those that hold the credential to provide training to our ECE workforce. We're also working with those that are in charge of funding to support the various sectors within early care and education. So we work with family child care providers, we work with center-based program leaders, and school-based that are serving children under the age of 5. So I am at those tables, as well as our regional managers are also there, and our quality improvement specialists are also supporting programs across all 64 counties in New York State.
Great. So it sounds like you have the state agency represented who's really overseeing the regulations. You've got the PD providers who's providing that direct support to the workforce, as well as the funders who might be providing the financial incentives and support for that work. And then yourself representing the quality rating system.
Yes.
When you think about, as you know, Christy was talking through those slides, and you think of those roles, did anything come to mind of a perspective that's not in those conversations that could be valuable and informative for the work that you're doing?
I think one of the areas that we need to continue to see how we can embed in some of our conversations are the program leaders that are actually in charge of figuring out how to bring all of our resources and all of our collective efforts into their programs so that they can use it to better support the needs of the students, their staff, and the families, right? And the communities at large. I think just so many times we are just talking with each other, preaching to the choir per se,
Right.
but then we get to go to the field to try to sell this product that we created without actually having them at the table testing it out and telling us, actually, that'll be great for you to develop this policy. However, right, with between burping a child and figuring out where to put the toddler, then I'll figure out how to use their legs. I don't see how I can make it to pull up your app on my phone because I need both of my hands to hold the infant and look after the toddler. So I think figuring out how to include the individuals that are ultimately the ones that we keep at the forefront when we're coming up with any ideas on how to best support the system would be a definite improvement to our approach.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, Yesenia. You're doing so much work on behalf of those programs. So how can you do that work with the programs in the conversation and learning about their experiences that you might not be aware of in their day-to-day real world life of their programs, and how all of the systems that you're designing and the offerings that you're creating actually work in that setting for them. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Did that bring up anything for anyone else as you're thinking about these multi-sector, multi-partner collaborations in the work that you're doing?
Well, similar to what Yesenia is doing, we are piecing together a number of different sources and resources in our state. We have the first registered apprenticeship that is funded by the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, which receives their funds from the federal DOL. We have, because family child care is not eligible to be included at the table under that funding, we sought other sources of funding, and were able to provide a couple of cohorts of training through the United Way of Central Mass philanthropic funding. We then pursued another private funder here in our region who funded us to start a unique project at the time that was taking people that were interested in working in the sector, and from the point that they expressed interest through licensure and then on to continuing ed, because we want our educators here to be high quality educators. And then in the middle of the cycles for that particular pot of funding to work with family child care educators, our state regulatory agency came out with an opportunity to serve as a statewide intermediary for family child care, which we applied for, and we're in charge of Central and Western Mass. So at the moment, and it is just temporarily at the moment, we have funding to work with all of these different groups. However, it's very fragmented, and each of the pots of money has their limitations, not only in time of availability, but in who we can serve and how we can do it. Our particular organization is a standalone nonprofit 501c3 that was the professional development opportunity offering in our region for about 30 years before the state switched the PD centers to the higher ed world. And now we partner with 2 local community colleges for people that are interested in bridging out of our programming into higher education. There are 2 things that I feel that are missing at the table. First is employer partners from the private sector, because ultimately they're the ones that are benefiting from people having lots of options and high quality options for childcare. And in my opinion, where they spend a lot of money to onboard people and retain employees, to put some of those funds towards early childhood, I think would really do a lot to extend the resiliency in what we're able to offer in the sector to retain people. The second thing that I'm grappling with here in Mass is that the voice of the educator is not necessarily heard in the way that I think it should be. We have a tendency now to be moving towards post-secondary work, which I understand is valid and admirable for many people. But 60% of our workforce are not educated beyond high school and don't necessarily have aspirations to move beyond that. They're happy doing what they are doing at the moment. So I don't think it's reasonable to just ignore what their wishes are as people that are working in the field and to implement expectations for higher educational requirements if they're getting the work done appropriately now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Leslie, for sharing that. And so if I'm following what you're experiencing, it sounds like you're working with multiple funders in a very collaborative way to provide services to these to the workforce and in supporting their career development. But because it is based on the various funding streams, you're experiencing a lot of fragmentation across those funding streams. And so I'm just curious, when you think about the system in Massachusetts or in central Massachusetts where you are, that's where you're at, correct? I see from.
That is correct. Yeah.
Are you aware of any convenings or system structures that would be supportive of having these conversations in a more coordinated way? Is there a table that you think would be helpful for you to be at to represent the work that you're doing in a multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration?
There are multiple opportunities for that, and I am already at a couple of those tables, which is helpful. We have a state advocacy group called Strategies for Children. And I'm actually going to be a panelist at a convening they're holding on Thursday. One of our private sector funders requires that we have a leadership council and advisory council that are made up of stakeholders in varying roles in the sector. And they help to oversee our grant and also think about scalability and advocacy at a state level. So there are definitely things that are out there as possibilities. I guess my frustration right now is they're slow moving. There's a lot that could be happening if more people were engaged now.
Yeah. And so when you say if more people were engaged, who are those people that you're thinking of who would be helpful to have engaged?
Well, we need systemic funding, not just the fragmented pots of money here and there. For example, when we started with the registered apprenticeship, we received adequate funding to run 2 cohorts a year. Since then, with rules changing from the federal government and state fund availability, we're now down to 1 cohort a year. So while we're still very thankful, of course, to be receiving the support from the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, 15 educators a year is not enough to clear up family child care deserts and the turnover that happens in the field. And what I hear from the employer partners that we work with, and we have about 33 at this point, is they're still struggling with darkened classrooms because they don't have qualified professionals to operate those classrooms. So during COVID, early education had the spotlight as being such a critical force. Right. And that spotlight is kind of shifted at the moment, but the need is still there.
Right. So, yeah, that ongoing challenge of needing systemic approaches versus these fragmented approaches.
And I think our legislature here in Massachusetts has been extraordinary with the investments that they've made most recently in early childhood. It's not that we don't have the support. There's just only so much funding that's available. So.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Leslie. Anyone else thinking about how these multi-sector, multi-partner collaborations are showing up in your program or your community, the work that you're doing?
Well, my whole job, can you all hear me okay?
Yes, go right ahead, Cindy.
And I apologize because I'm not in a private office today, so you may hear some background noise.
No worries. I feel like the technology is really good at drowning out that background noise at any point.
That's good.
I hear no background noise.
Okay, good. So my job was actually created. Part of my responsibility is to bring and reach out to different sectors outside of childcare. In Texas, we're kind of structured a little uniquely. Our workforce boards, there's 28 workforce boards in the state, and each workforce board is autonomous on how they are structured and how they handle childcare. We are the CCS. We manage the CCS program at the board level. We do have some local flexibility that's given to us through the rules there. But outside of that, our departments and the way we handle childcare is all differently. So I am actually the only one with this position in the state of Texas as an industry coordinator. And I am looking at childcare from an industry perspective, not just the CCS program. I'm not limited to just focusing on that. The rest of my department, they run that program and monitor that program. And so what we do is we do have an advisory council, which is the stakeholders within childcare. But then I am meeting with economic developers, chambers, business leaders, other departments within the workforce system to bring everybody to the table to really have childcare part of the conversation in everything they do. That includes school districts as well. We have a school district out here that just announced they're using some bond money to open 4 centers within the school district to support their teachers and staff. So I'll be meeting with them to see what we can do to support. I also do a landscape study, which looks at every sector that impacts childcare. And as you know, that's every sector. So I'm looking at manufacturing, the service sector, poverty, food insecurity, population. So I do a landscape study every year so that we are aware of what's going on in our community and what services on top of childcare and wraparound services that we can look at from a workforce board and look at other grant opportunities we can tap into for additional resources as well. So I have a very unique, a very awesome position, and it allows us to bring a lot of other people that are usually not at the table, because we also bring in financial institutions, anybody that I can make contact with to have conversations with, to just educate about childcare and the impact of childcare in the overall economic health of our community. So it's a very good position. We're in a very good position because we feel like that we are supporting our community with an additional step that a lot of others have not had that opportunity.
Great, thank you. And if you wouldn't mind, Cindy, could you just clarify CCS for folks who might not be familiar with that acronym?
Oh, that's just child care services. That's just the subsidy program that's coming from the CCDF.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that's what that is. And, you know, like I said, my job, I actually do some PD for our providers as well, just talking about educating our providers on understanding how the funding structure works from the federal level all the way through the state. In Texas, we do have a wait list, a very large wait list. And so there's, you know, and when you don't understand how that works and why we have such a wait list, we felt it was really important to start educating. So I was doing that training actually at the state level at some of our state conferences, just to kind of help providers also understand the industry a little better. Because as you know, a lot of times when you're a provider, as a provider, I ran a center for 10 and a half years. And so you just kind of jump in 2 feet and you're always treading water. So a lot of times you're really not understanding all those churnings that happen that actually impact your business without realizing it. And so part of my job is also to do professional development for the providers to kind of help them navigate that.
Right. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Cindy. I think your example broadens this idea of multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration, not just like the various sectors and partners within the early childhood ecosystem, but the broader workforce ecosystem and those connections that are so important. And And there's really so many shared aspects of the work that, you know, we're confronting in trying to transform the systems for the early childhood workforce that apply to the workforce in many other industries as well. And so it sounds like those connections and the ecosystem that you're working in on behalf of the workforce and connecting to other workforce initiatives is very impactful for the work that you're doing there in Tarrant County. So thank you for sharing that example. So just to shift a little bit, we've heard a few different examples of how this is showing up for folks across the country. And so thinking about the examples we've heard, as well as any way that you're thinking about how these collaborations are showing up in your work, would love to hear about what practices have helped your cross-sector partnerships stay coordinated, effective, and representative. And so I think we're putting that question in chat as well. Thank you, Christy. And so from those of you who've shared, but also would love to bring in any other voices from folks who haven't shared, and when you're thinking about the collaborations that you're connected to, what is working really well to keep them coordinated, effective, and representative of those that are impacted by the work that you're doing? Practicing, I'm happy to practice my wait time because I know somebody's coming up with some ideas and just needs another moment or two to feel comfortable unmuting and jumping into the conversation. So I might also ask some of our authors who are here who've worked on this brief, our subject matter experts, if they heard anything in those examples that folks have shared that connected to, you know, the content of the brief in a meaningful way when we think about what is known about multi-sector, multi-partner collaborations and what is needed for coordination and representation to be effective. If there's something that you heard in those examples that that shows up in the research or in the brief that will be forthcoming.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Sandra. And when we think about what leads to that effective collaboration, what are some of those kind of concrete things? So our one secondary driver is trying to get at establishing some of those really clear structures. And it might vary a little bit depending on what the needs are of that group, that change team, that coalition. But the key of coming together to decide together, how are we going to collaborate? How are we going to communicate? What are the shared platforms, the shared communication channels, the process that we're going to contribute together to think about this collaborative decision making, so everyone knows what to expect from their own participation and from their colleagues. I think that sometimes that seems to be one of the helpful strategies of coming together as a change team, of being able to talk about how are we going to establish these practices or these processes.
Great. Thank you for that, Christy. And I see that Andrea added into the chat about over communicating. I do think, especially when a collaboration is getting up and running, you definitely want to lean towards that over communicating, scheduling the standing meetings. That's been some of my experience to have it on the calendar, and it's better to have the time blocked and maybe even more time than you think you might need. And everyone's always happy to get time back if needed. But this language access, I think, is an important factor as well. And Andrea, I don't know if you'd be willing to share more, because I'm also thinking of especially when we're wanting to engage educators, thinking about how, whether it's supporting their the language, their everyday language, their home language, but also how are we supporting them to understand if we're asking them to engage in the systems work. And we all speak in a lot of acronyms, and sometimes those systems pieces aren't as accessible to them. And so how are we making sure that they can be fully engaged from that perspective as well? And Leslie, if you want to, and I see Leslie has a question for you, Andrea, about what tools you find work best. So would love to hear more if you're able to unmute and share.
Yeah, definitely. So as far as like in a meeting platform, I definitely, especially using the platform Zoom, which just has worked pretty seamlessly for simultaneous interpreting services. We do have trusted orgs here that we've built long-term relationships with for particularly Spanish language, but also Haitian Creole, which is a large part of our population and the organizations that we work with. Um, and I also will say, it is not, I would say, best practice right now, but there has been improvement in so far as the automatic translation space and the use of AI towards making that sort of thing accessible. So not only are some of the organizations that we work with, their primary language may be different than English, but also especially when interfacing with families and um, sometimes that we find that they're less hesitant to communicate with us when they can communicate through an app or through texting. WhatsApp is very popular with our folks. So using the translation uh, available on that platform has been super, super helpful in getting us from like point A to point B with planning.
Great, thank you for those details. Did that answer your question, Leslie? Any other questions that you have?
I was just hoping she had a magic tool that we hadn't discovered yet. But yes, that answers it. Thank you.
I wish.
And you, Jen, I think you might have come off mute. Were you wanting to contribute?
No, I was just going to add on to like highlight the importance of making this multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration really to be an inclusive setting and equitable setting. Sometimes in those multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration, there's sometimes dominating voices, and there's sometimes like something is going toward the direction there is a preset agenda. So I think in order to make those multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration really authentic, I think instead of relying on each people, when we were reviewing those examples, what we learned is that those tools like processes or templates or meeting notes, whatever those things that set up, make those collaboration really effective. And also co-chairing, especially make sure including educators, so then give them equal power. We learned that some successful multi-partner, multi-sector collaboration has those features. So I know all other people already share that, so I'm just echoing what other people are saying.
Absolutely great. Yes, thank you for that, you, Jen. And I do see that one comment was added into the Zoom board from a migrant Head Start program that's engaging with farm owners and farm workers. And so if the person who added that, if this conversation has prompted, or if there's anything from your engagement with the farm owners and farm workers as it relates to what we're talking about, would love to hear more about that.
Hi, so that's me again, Andrea.
Okay, great.
East
Thank you,
Coast
Andrea.
Migrant Head Start Project. Yeah. And so we have definitely found that the approach is quite different from farm owner to farm worker. So honestly, this conversation is giving me a lot to chew on, and part of the reason why I wanted to participate in this conversation, because I have found, particularly in that space, it's quite different. And I'm kind of brainstorming to think about better ways to bring the farm owner community in particular in. Sometimes there has been some, either fear on our side, anxiety, or lack of understanding from the other side too of what we do. We frequently, will be recruiting in communities on farms, and um, we have heard multiple times like, well, we don't have any immigrants here, or things like that, or illegals. And so the concept of meeting people where they're at, and also, hopefully educating people, which for farm owners themselves, what we provide is a net positive. The once their farm workers are able to know that their children are well cared for, then they can show up to work reliably. So this, yeah, I've definitely had a lot to chew on based on this conversation and kind of tooling through it, thinking on it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andrea. And certainly don't, as you're chewing on that and, processing, don't hesitate to leverage the expertise of all of the participants in this group right now. If you have any specific questions, or there's a specific, problem of practice in that work that you'd love to explore with the group. And I see Christy is ready to jump in with something.
That was an answer for the question. As you were saying that, it was striking me that I think both Yesenia and Leslie at the beginning talking about all the really good collaboration that is happening in your sectors. And both of you had called out that conversations or including educators in those conversations has been more of a challenge. I think this example that just came up around language is a really interesting strategy that can help engage and make meetings and participation accessible to educators. I'm really curious if there's others who've had success with some strategies of engaging educators at the table as part of those collaborative efforts and what that's looked like.
So to clarify, my frustration with not hearing the educators' voices is not within our organization. It's with some of the other entities and funders that we work with. We have been part of a project recently that has offered opportunities for people in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. This is a pilot program, and eventually Massachusetts would like to be able to expand it to 12 different primary languages because we have a very diverse population in our little itty bitty state. And it makes a world of difference for people when they can participate in their native language instead. They don't have. I'm also a former adult basic education administrator that worked with English speakers of other languages. So I know how meaningful that is for people to be confident focusing on content instead of on the translation that constantly happens when something's offered in their non-primary language. So, Andrea, I'm a big fan of translation too.
Yeah, I think that translation is so key. And as I was mentioning before, I think even important to think about like translating the jargon too, whether, so being mindful of that as well. There's a lot of jargon in our ECE systems work that sometimes we forget that not everyone speaks that language either. So we can move on to a third question to pose to the group, thinking about where are the biggest opportunities right now for collaboration to drive systems change. So when you think about the work that you're doing right now, if there's not a collaborative space happening that could really be impactful, where might that be?
So I want to bring this up again so far as my situation and kind of what I've been chewing on here is,
Mhm.
for me and for us thinking about how we can leverage relationships with farm owners and like deepen them in order to have them have like investment in our cause and in supporting early education. And so I'm curious with other people's experience about driving that change with other sectors who maybe don't have a clear understanding or experience with what you're trying to push forward and what your goals may necessarily be, even though like I can clearly see it and I try to communicate it, but I wonder if I'm doing the best that I can at that.
Thank you for posing that question, Andrea. Would love to hear from others. I see folks exchange, Cindy and Cynthia exchanging in the chat. Love to see these connections being made and resources shared. So any thoughts to support Andrea as she's thinking about making the case to new audiences?
Andrea, I think to some degree it's a sales job. And one of the funders that we worked with us to really come up with an elevator pitch so that we're concise and direct about the salient points we want to make. And most people want to know what's in it for them. So if you can tell them by investing this amount, you save that much down the line, that's a strong influencer, unfortunately.
Yeah, we were very fortunate. I actually worked for the Small Business Development Center in the same community in which now I'm at the Workforce Board. So a lot of our providers were actually part of my clientele, especially during the pandemic when I was with them. And so when I was working with the Small Business Development Center, not only did I have that connection to the childcare community, but I also had all those partnerships already made. So I brought those partnerships with me into the Workforce Board in a lot of those other sectors because I was already there. And it is very important to make sure that when you are making those partnership connections, going back to the jargon, that you also understand theirs so that when you're communicating with them, you're both actually speaking that same language, where not only are they understanding that childcare language, but also that you're able to understand theirs and understand their roles that they have in the community as well. So, like I said, for us, it kind of came with me into the job. So I already had some of that established. But if you're going out to do that, as Leslie said, it is a sales job. You're trying to convince others why this is so important and impactful and how they can then join in and it will benefit their sector.
Thank you for that, Cindy. And as you see, the brief is now literally hot off the presses. As Christy said, it was on the press when we began the call, but is now off the press and available on our website. So the link is there. And I'm just going to put somebody who I know will be okay with me putting her on the spot. Sandy, if you want to go ahead and share your multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration that you're kicking off. It's exciting work.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I was so excited about this call, and then I had a data meeting about the project I'm on, and it lasted from 11 until 1:45. So when that many people are willing to help you, you just keep right on plugging along. So I wrote a grant with the Women's Foundation of Alabama for a summit on early care and education for East Alabama. To look at, I work at a community college. I was formerly at the Alabama Department of Early Ed, where we launched the pre-K. So I learned a lot of lessons about systems change through that. Sandra and I were colleagues in the Leadership Academy, where we learned about systems thinking. And so I put all of those pieces at play in this summit and was awarded the grant. And so now we're trying to lift this grant to increase access, quality, and affordability of childcare in the East Alabama area. Currently, we're kind of, well, in my work in early care and education, when I walk into childcare to observe my students, I'm very alarmed at the lack of quality. And have looked at different ways to look at quality, and got a lot of pushback about, does Quality Stars really leverage for better child outcomes? One of our colleagues suggested that it doesn't. And so I said, well, at this point, we're looking at safety, because when I walk into places, I don't even see safe environments in much of our care, emotionally and sometimes physically. I think emotionally it's unsafe for the workers and for the children, but most importantly, unsafe for the children. So I've written this grant. We've gotten the funding, and now, as a divine intervention, our local chamber had identified in their workforce committee group that childcare was their top priority for workforce development. So they've been on board, and now we're trying to convene a group of stakeholders where we've pulled from all across the what we identify as the ecosystem, to try to then broaden our understanding of the ecosystem that's serving childcare right now. So it's really messy work. It is, I equate it to boil a bowl of spaghetti, pull it over, let it dry, and then try to untangle the bowl of spaghetti. I feel like it's what we're trying to do. But it's exciting work, and the fact that people are leaning into it is good, but I like, it's a lot. So it's
It
a
is,
messy.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Sandy. So I'm curious, as you're getting ready to get this off the ground, do you have a specific challenge or question that you're wrestling with that would be helpful to hear from the expertise of folks from other states and from the Workforce Center in this, who are in the conversation right now?
Yeah, well, yeah, so many questions, right? But like, one is like, I'm really curious about systems for childcare where there is supplement for childcare. How does that work? Because we just, on this phone call, of course, it didn't end up just being about data. They've pitched this idea to do a millage tax to fund early care. So to begin with supplementing the cost for families, but eventually get to, very little cost at all to the families and increase quality. But like, is there a model of that anywhere that we could look to, or does anybody know if anything like that has been done? I mean, I know New Mexico just said universal child care, but is that really going to work? Do they really have the workforce prepared for that?
So your question is about,
Are there models to replicate?
For like a mixed delivery with mixed funding, subsidy as well as other, or
Define mixed delivery. So like, I think it could supplement Head Start. I think it could supplement local providers. I think it could also be a funding stream for somebody who wants to open a child care center but doesn't have liquid assets that would allow them to purchase. I mean, any piece of land here is $1 million to get started, and then you've got to put a building on it and then furnish it, and then, I mean, it's a lot of money. But are there places where things like that have happened before?
I'm curious from the group if what Sandy's describing is something that you've encountered. If you see, there's a comment in chat about using ballot measures for special tax, or hiring firms to test how likely something, hiring a firm to see how likely something like that might pass, additional sales tax. So some tax strategies for increasing revenue.
Hey, Sandra, this is Shannon.
Yes.
I just put in the chat, it's old, it's from 2022, but it's from the Children's Funding Project, and it is about New Orleans having an early childhood education millage, and it talks about what they went through and how it supported city seats. So that could be a good place to start. It's not statewide, but it was within a city. So that might be helpful.
Well, that's perfect because ours is city as
Okay.
well. And some, now that you say that, someone else mentioned New Orleans. But thank you. And I'll download that right into my file.
And I would say, from the multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration perspective, I think doing that type of work would be really important to think about the multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration for getting input on how that type of revenue approach impacts different sectors, and getting that kind of making sure that those stakeholders are involved in co-creating and co-designing that approach. I'm seeing in chat that there's ballot initiative that passed in Travis County as well recently. And so Jennifer, I don't know, do you have, I'm curious from that, the success of that ballot initiative, like how did multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration show up in that work? I imagine there's a variety of ways it showed up.
Yeah, I'm from Kansas, so I wasn't actually a part of it, but I've been following it closely because I oversee a pilot project that is rallying behind community efforts to build capacity for childcare. No one, right now is like moving forward with a ballot measure or anything of that nature, but there are discussions of how to, partner with state, agencies. But, maybe the funding driver is happening locally. Travis County is an Austin, Texas is a part of Travis County, and the EC3 Alliance, I think, because you mentioned they contract with other agencies and whatnot, but I think they were the driver behind this work and really getting the measure to pass. I mean, I think that's the thing. A lot of cities and counties have put ballot measures, put them together, but oftentimes they don't pass. And so I think that is key there. National League of Cities also released a great toolkit for municipalities just here in September. I've just started diving a little bit in it, watched a few webinars, but great roadmap for anyone that is, just hearing you all say, you have to know both, like all of the lanes, all of the language when you're doing this multi-sector and collaborative kind of funding model. And when you are using multiple funding streams, it does get fragmented, and you have different evaluations and reporting that you have to do for all of them, and juggling what can be used for what. So when cities are looking at ways to really support these efforts that like nonprofits are doing right now and losing capacity to do them, like that just really brings in another voice that just kind of, I don't know if any of you have read Dan Worry's Daycare Myth. And like it just, I think part of the challenge is having folks see birth to 5 as part of the education of a child from birth to, career. that cradle to career kind of mentality. And so, looking at ways to kind of do that and bridge that, I think, but it gets challenging because just like I think it was Cindy, she was mentioning, there's apprenticeships and there's higher ed and there's all of these different folks that are trying to solve the problem. So anytime that there can be some collaboration, that sure does help, because it's like, where do we begin? So I may have complicated the conversation here, but I just, sometimes it's just hard to find, you have to Google the right terms to get at what you're looking for from your perspective. And so anytime that anyone might have something that sparks, and none of it may be useful, but it might lead you down a path that does lead you to something useful. So
Jennifer, what was it? You said the National League of Cities has a like a thing you can follow?
yep, yep.
What would that be under?
Here I actually had it pulled up before I hopped on this call because I was sending it to some stakeholders here.
Well,
Those-
I think it's interesting. So many people have talked about this millage tax and how it can be controversial, but it's what the two gentlemen. So we've got a guy in workforce. He's the technical person that works with manufacturing. And then the chamber person, they said, well, how are you going to get the people invested in coming to this summit? Like, they're going to think you're asking them for money. How are you going to get them to come? And so the chamber person said, well, I propose we say it's a tax, and then everybody's going to lean in because they're going to want to know about this tax. And then whatever they decide in the end will be what,
They just
but it gets them to the table to have the discussion. So I don't even know if we'll end up doing a tax, but
yeah. I think just speaking from conversations I've been a part of here, it's the opportunity for multiple opportunities. Because if you limit one, you possibly are fragmenting off someone who might have been listening. Until you're ready to make the call of this is what we're going to do. Does that make sense? It's being very open until you can't be open anymore to the strategies that might be taken. Yeah. We have a couple of like our CCR&R has done some summits, much of like what I think you're referring to here, and they've got, a lot of people to engage, but like the goalpost keeps moving as far as who and what and where might, they might take action. And that's hard. If the goalpost keeps moving, like, they give a challenge back to you, like, well, we need this. Okay, well, you give that. Well, then then it keeps moving. But we need this and we need this. And so, like, at what point, yeah, what's the threshold? If anybody knows that, I'd be glad to know.
But I think that's an important point, Jennifer, and I'm so glad you came onto camera so I could see you and see that we just met last week in Kansas.
We did.
So I'm so glad to see you here today. But I think that's an important part of this collaboration piece is if we already have an end in mind, then are we truly being collaborative? And so how do we use multi-partner, multi-sector collaborations to co-create and co-design the solutions and strategies?
Yes.
Well, so help me with that, because there's a good question. My people are pushing back from that. They say I like to go to these meetings knowing what the end product is going to be. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's the way we've always done it. That's not getting things done. But like, if you don't have an agenda, if you don't steer the conversation in some way, then how do you effectively facilitate it without, because I don't necessarily know what my dream is about this. I just want it to be better for children.
Yeah, I think that's where user design strategies human-centered design strategies can be really helpful. And so if you were even to look at like the Stanford, oh, now I'm forgetting the name of, there are some good resources available there's a Stanford Center focused on human-centered design that that has some, helpful prompts and structures for facilitating design sessions with users that can be applied in this type of work. I can try.
And Jennifer, you're in which part of Kansas?
I am about as centralized as you can get. I personally am in a little town called Lindsborg, Kansas, Swedish capital of the United States. We're gearing up for our big old festival here this week, which yeah, I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to be making, but anyway, no, so central Kansas. So I represent kind of a what you might call micropolitan kind of area. We're not real big, but we're not super rural either. So
How
but
close is that to Leavenworth?
we're a ways away. That's more northeast. So Wichita is probably you might be familiar with Wichita, Kansas. I'm about an hour north of there. Um, but yeah, so that would be northeast. So very northeast, Kansas City area.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I
Yeah.
did some work there with some really forward-thinking people in their school system. I was thinking that might be a good
Yep.
connector in Leavenworth, but if that's
Know
that
who you're
far,
talking
that's not
about.
gonna.
Yeah. 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 No, and I think that's yeah, what everybody, yeah, it's the magic question. But Sandra, I'm gonna look that up, human-centered design strategies of just like those prompts, because I think, and when you say what are we aiming for? Like what's the end product? I think it's always that I there again, like the vision is what I've been reading is important. So like, yeah, what is it? We want safe care, we want affordable care. But how we get there, I think, is, I mean, I'm working with 7 different regional areas now, and none of them are going about it the same way, but they all have the same end goal in mind. So I think that goes back to Sandra of like, if you start like, this is how we're going to do it, then is that really collaborative? And they're each like, they're just utilizing their own strengths and resources that they have available to them. And that's not the same in each community. But the children and families living within them are, like we're all human. We all have the same needs. And so that's kind of what they're rallying behind is just we're making it more affordable. We've decided there's a wage that we're aiming for. That's part of the conversation. And then also just kind of aligning it with existing like structures and systems, pairing that with things that are familiar to the other sectors that might be engaged. So
I put a couple of links that I found, I
oh,
couldn't
there it
remember
is.
the
Yes,
exact B
thank
school,
you.
but I found it. But there's a couple of links there about user-centered design, and that's just a starting point. But and sometimes it's even worthwhile to potentially, find somebody who's certified in human-centered design for facilitation and such. But that is a way that is an approach for having an agenda, but not having a predetermined outcome.
Well, how do you get those fellas to quit thinking like that? That's what I'm struggling with because, they want, I don't know if there are any gentlemen on here, but I don't want to be rude. I'm not saying that, but they just, they need that. This is our plan. This is what we want everybody to get to. And I don't know how to explain to them that we can't know what everybody wants or needs.
Well, perhaps the brief that's now available on our website would be a helpful place for them to start with. Christy, it looks like you're also coming off of mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is the question, Sandy, and I think like having those opportunities, I think you nailed it when you said like this is what they're used to and this is their experience, and how do we help them have experiences that show them it doesn't have to be just like that, that there are other strategies and processes of this is how we're gonna move forward with this change team or this task force, this group. Here's the design in mind. I want to be cognizant of time too. If we had any final thoughts or either questions to pose to colleagues or thoughts to share from today before we wrap things up. I wanted to say I really, really appreciated this conversation, and thinking about, Sandra, you do such a wonderful job of asking as different examples come up of different ways that we think about multi-sector, multi-partner collaboration, and really, even in situations like this where that's what we're talking about, we can see how many different times in different places where we're thinking about an idea and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. How could that come up? How could we use collaboration? How could we make sure that we're centering all those voices? I think it is something that it's tricky for us to all keep that front of mind, that it's such a central, it needs to be such a central piece of what we do. So I appreciate all the examples and being able to talk those through together. Anyone else have any final thoughts they wanna share?
I think it's with any relationship that you're trying to build, it takes time. I'm going on 2.5 years of educating our community partners that are outside of the ECE sector on why ECE matters to them. And so it takes a while to educate and bring them up to speed. Kind of what Sandy's struggling with is, what you find, because they really don't see the importance of how we have to systemically look at things because of the intricacies within that industry. Because they're used to, especially if you're looking at economic developers and business owners, they're used to what they're used to. And now saying you've got to look at it separately because this is how childcare is really, that whole ECE is impacting you so that they can make that connection, but then start understanding how this industry is so complex and complicated and there's so many layers to it. So I know it's hard to say it takes time, but it does take time.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that the chamber was already interested in this, or else I would really be struggling, because with that partner, it's pretty helpful. So, Cindy, I feel like I got a boost on that, and I acknowledge it.
And Andrea, did you have something you wanted to add?
Nope, I accidentally came off mute. Sorry.
No worries. Well, I really appreciated everyone sharing your thoughts and your context today. I am going to stick a couple of things in the chat. The first one, we have a short survey. It's just a couple of questions. We would really appreciate if you could take a moment and share your perspective about both today and this topic. And then I'm also going to put in as a reminder, this coffee chat is one of a series, and we have information about additional coffee chats on our website. I just put the link in the chat for that. Our next session topic is a third driver in the ECE workforce systems change framework, and it's on engaging early educators in systems change. So it's related to what we're talking about today, but I think it will be a really good conversation around ways to specifically engage with early educators. And that one is scheduled for November 18th. So you can register for that session if you'd like on that link. So thank you very much for spending a little bit of time with us this afternoon. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.